New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Rosenberg, you dressed up last time for AOC. This morning, she's only on the phone, so she can't see you.
I'm glad I didn't bother.
Face.
I didn't bother wearing a tie for you today, AOC.
Ladies, Alex, how are you, AOC?
I'm well. I'm safe. How are you all?
We're doing good. Your phone line that we have you on right now is a little choppy, a little airy, and a little buzzy. Are you on a landline?
No, I'm on a cell.
On a cell.
You sound like Cory Booker. This is a problem.
Yo, AOC, every time we have Cory Booker on, he's calling from the worst phone in America.
Oh my God.
Are you in D.C. or are you in the Bronx?
I'm in the Bronx.
You're in the Bronx.
That sounds like it.
Yeah.
In your building in the Bronx and the cell phone connection. Listen, we're blessed to have you today. Thank you for your time. We would have loved to be able to see your face and say hi, wave hi. But thank you for taking time. I saw your tweet just last night with the news that the Democratic primary of New York State had been canceled.
Yeah.
I would love to get some insight from you on what this actually means. There's the obvious, but what does this mean long term?
You know, I think that it's just the wrong move to make. This is not a public health decision. You know, the state isn't doing this because of coronavirus, because if they did and if they were doing it, then they would cancel all the elections. But they're still holding elections for everybody else in June on primary day. They just decided to cancel unilaterally. Biden didn't ask for this. The DNC didn't ask for this. Bernie didn't ask for this. They just decided to essentially cancel the presidential primary on their own, and that's a huge problem. You know, it's going to hurt down ballot candidates. There's a lot of people who want to run for office, who want to have that progressive energy up and down the ballot. It's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt turnout, and it also hurts New York in terms of delegates at the convention, which are used to help, shape the party platform, adopt things like universal health care in the Democratic platform. So this is a problem. And
this is basically silencing what I saw even when Barack Obama endorsed Biden. He made sure to nod to the progressive energy and what Bernie brought to the conversation, which for me was saying, I thought anyway, my interpretation was, okay, they're going to keep this progressive energy within the party and figure out a way to work this into the platform, which is also why Bernie decided to stay on the ballot. And that's what I hear you saying.
Yep, 100%. There are a lot of people that were saying and kind of giving lip service to the fact that they really cared about party unity and bringing the party together. And if we do care about that, then we need to make sure that, we have this primary, because it is so divisive for little to no reason, right? Biden is the presumptive nominee. There is no reason that we should be disenfranchising millions of progressive voters in the state and in one of the biggest and most important Democratic states in the country. And for us to just cancel the election is really divisive, and it absolutely does a tremendous amount of damage in boosting turnout for November and uniting the party.
I guess I didn't even understand it in full, because I assumed that meant there were going to be no elections. But for there to still be elections and not the presidential election, it seems like the only thing you're doing is sort of giving President Trump the opportunity down the line to point to this canceled election as maybe a reason for him to try to postpone or cancel the general.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very, very dangerous precedent to set. And again, it'd be one thing if they said we're suspending in-person voting, we're switching everybody to mail-in ballots. Like, I understand changing how we vote.
Right.
Establish the precedent of just outright canceling a presidential primary election. You are giving Trump, and you're getting into very dangerous territory of saying, okay, well, if this state did it, why can't we do this for November?
That's right.
And that is not, we don't want to get within 10 feet of that. And I'm very concerned that the state is just handing a big gift to Trump in doing this.
Who exactly makes this decision?
Well, that's another problem, too, in that this this was kind of like a closed-door decision. This wasn't decided by a court. This wasn't decided by a judge. This was decided by a couple of folks on the Board of Elections, who are, political appointees, some of them. And so this is not a clean decision. This was not recommended by public health officials. This doesn't come on the recommendation of doctors or any of that.
And so is there anything that the public can do to reverse this decision?
I think one of the things that we need to do is to call on the DNC to really respond to this decision. I think that there are ways that we can apply pressure to the state, because we are essentially violating our pact for the convention. And now what this does, too, is that this kind of allows the state to send whatever delegates that they want, which is not how this is supposed to go. The delegates that get sent are supposed to be based on the vote. So I think we need to call on the DNC to challenge New York on this, and to make sure that there are consequences for this decision, and to call on ways to appeal this decision.
Yeah, I think, as average everyday folks that don't understand all the political inner workings, which is most people, that's where somebody like yourself has been useful in giving us insight on how to actually become active, which is why we're all so thankful that you're vocal and, and obviously representing the city in the way that you do. The other thing is, I just want to point out, you're such a celebrity that I'm willing to deal with this phone line sounding as bad as it does just to have you on for a few minutes.
I think we should still try to have her call back. It sounds horrifying.
Yeah, you want me to call back?
Will you just try it right back? Yeah.
Call right back.
All right, I'll do that.
Because with cell phones, sometimes it literally just takes the one call back, and it's better. So
let's see.
We'll take a shot. I mean, she's up in the BX.
I mean, she's here, so might as well.
We got to find out who her cell phone provider is. Hopefully, they're not an advertiser, so we can trash them.
That's a good point. By the way, though, we do have to reach.
You have a bad line for AOC.
We should try to reach out to the DNC too about pressuring here.
AOC's back.
All right. Is this
Woo!
Yo, sounded so much
okay,
better.
big difference.
There you go.
So much better.
night and day?
Now, I reached out to you on Twitter, AOC, because I'm very confused about city hospitals, which are very underfunded, and now it's all been exacerbated by COVID-19. So up in the BX, I've been talking to some doctors at Lincoln Hospital, trying to help them, trying to locate some money to get them equipment that they need. Not just PPE, but like they don't have monitors to monitor the different rooms where they have COVID patients locked down, et cetera, et cetera. And I legit couldn't find somebody at the city level to have this conversation with, right? Like, to get money to Lincoln Hospital, which is, right in the Bronx, is underfunded. And we've been hearing about, obviously in Queens at Elmhurst. We've been hearing about in Jamaica. We've been hearing about Harlem Hospital. A lot of these city hospitals that just don't have, either up-to-date equipment or appropriate equipment to deal with what we're going through right now with this pandemic. Is there any insight you could give us on bringing attention to these hospitals that were already underfunded, and now during this, it's just been made worse?
Yeah, I do think it's important that we, take this moment to acknowledge how important public hospitals are to us and our community, because what a lot of people don't realize is that there is a difference in public hospitals and then there are private hospitals. And the beautiful thing about public hospitals like, Elmhurst Hospital is that they treat everybody. They do not care about your insurance status. They do not care about your immigration status. They will do everything they can to treat you 100%, and they work out everything else later. Private hospitals, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. And, your ability to get care if you cannot pay or if you do not have documented status, can be kind of mixed when you go to a private hospital. When you go to a public hospital like Elmhurst or any other public hospital in the city, and they will treat you, and they will treat you at a very high level of care. And in fact, you look at the actual community surrounding Elmhurst, and it is one of the only places in the United States where your income is not totally predictive of your healthcare status. And that is thanks to Elmhurst Hospital, because they are one of the few hospitals, and public hospitals are one of the few places that tries to treat healthcare as a human right, which is what we're fighting for on the federal level. So ultimately, you know, when you look at like the big deal, like the big major goals, you know, I think we really need to focus on single payer healthcare and passing things like Medicare for all, so that these hospitals are supported long term. But in the short term, a big thing that we need to do is fund these hospitals. You know, we're making some moves on the federal level, so these hospitals are starting to get federal funding with some of these relief packages, but it's not enough. In the wake of that, you know, while the federal government is trying to fund these hospitals, on the state level, they are cutting money to these hospitals. You know, the irony of this pandemic is that because there's so many people getting care, these hospitals are running out of money, and the state is running out of money. And so now the exact opposite of what should be going on, which is increasing funding to hospitals, they're actually decreasing funding to Medicaid and hospital payments during this time. And so, you know, this is really complicated. And of course, a big thing that people can do is, you know, especially if you have funds, is to donate to these hospitals. But ultimately, it's really, you know, this isn't a small nonprofit or a charity. It takes billions of dollars to fund hospitals. And so really what we need to talk about, you know, moving forward is how we're going to get money straight to these hospitals and how the government is going to fund them.
And as voters, is there anything as voters and obviously taxpaying citizens, who should we be speaking to?
I think, you know, we should be speaking up to the governor, and you know, I think we need to be speaking up to our state reps, our state legislature. But you know, it's a tough decision, and I understand, you know, Cuomo is under pressure, but it's, you know, we could have raised taxes on the rich, and we could have asked, you know, a lot of New York's wealthiest folks to step up and raise our taxes this year in order to cover that. But instead, we didn't raise anyone's taxes. We didn't raise any taxes on the wealthiest of wealthy New Yorkers. I'm not even talking about like middle class or upper middle class. I'm talking about
people who make people who make tens of millions annually.
Right, like people that have like their fifth penthouse. You know, that's who we're talking about. And there's a lot of people like that in New York City. We have some of the largest amount of billionaires in the country living in our city. And I think that it's that time for those folks to step up and help save our public hospitals. And, you know, that I think, instead of doing that, instead of asking those folks to step up, we did not raise taxes one bit. And now we're cutting Medicaid, and now we're cutting education expenses, and now we're going to be enduring very brutal cuts to not just hospitals, but to, you know, the public in general. So really, it's on us to ask the governor. It's on us to ask, you know, state senators and state reps, what are we doing? You know, why are we doing this?
Do you believe, AOC, that, I don't know, mid-June is a timeline that we could potentially gain some sense of normalcy, or do you try to just avoid expectations altogether at this point?
Well, I think the tough thing is that, you know, any given month, you know, 2+ months out from now, I think that there is, like, we can get back to normal, but it depends on policy decisions. And so long as Trump is playing games, so long as our leadership is playing games, we can't. Because here's the thing. Here's what we need to reopen. We could be on a fast track to reopening if we develop mass testing capacity, which means you could go to a CVS and get a test. Or it should be as easy, like, you should be able, we need to develop mass testing capacity to the point that if you want to test, if you say, I'm weird, or I just traveled, or I just got in contact with someone whose mother had coronavirus, you could roll up somewhere and get a test.
Mm-hmm.
we do not have that mass testing capacity right now. But you need two ingredients. One, you need mass testing that is as easy to get as McDonald's. And the second thing is that we need what is known as contact tracing, which is basically if you have coronavirus or were exposed to coronavirus, that you can kind of share with your workplace or you can share with people you've been in contact with, and then those people can go get a test. And those are the two ingredients that you need to reopen the economy. You know, there's talk about a vaccine, there's talk about all of that stuff. That's for long term. You know, that is long term so that we can all get a vaccine and not have to worry about this again. But in the short term, to reopen the economy, you really just need mass testing capacity and contact tracing.
How close are we? How close are we to getting this mass testing? Because I hear people saying, you know, we have, you know, hundreds of thousands of tests coming, and we see all these headlines, but I still hear of people who either are infected or trying to get an exit test, like they want to just make sure that they're not getting, you know, that they're still negative. They're not even able to check. They're scared to go back to work because they don't even know if the virus is completely out of their system. So what's the reality that we're facing right now when it comes to that?
Well, and that's where it starts getting tricky, because that timeline is dependent on our elected officials. Because even when we look at these relief packages, we have to fight Trump just to fund testing and hospitals. In the last relief package, Trump didn't want to fund it. You know, Pelosi fought with him and was able to get some testing and some funds for testing, but it's not going to be enough. Even the funds that have been administered, and they're, you know, people are talking about, okay, we're producing hundreds of thousands of tests. We need hundreds of thousands of tests per day in New York City minimum. But really what we're going to need is essentially we're going to need hundreds of millions of tests at a given, you know, at a certain point. We're going to have to get to that capacity where literally there's a test for every person in this country. And how close we are to that, you know, right now, like we certainly did not approve the funding for that in our most recent relief package. And so that's the part where it's tricky and where it's also immensely frustrating, because we could have developed a mass testing capacity 2 months ago. If Trump paid attention to these intelligence reports, we could have had mass testing by now. You know, you look at these other countries like South Korea and a lot of other places that are able to at least take their first shot at reopening economies. And it's not to say that they're going perfectly every time, but they're at least going through their first round of trying to get things back to normal. We're still on lockdown because we don't have the test. And the reason we don't have the test is because our political leadership, you know, isn't stepping up, and particularly Republicans are not stepping up to allow us to have this mass testing capacity. So how close are we? I don't know. I think if we want to get to normal...
I trust you now. I trust you now. They say people that say I don't know are the people you're supposed to listen to the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because that part is just dependent on human behavior and
right.
human decisions, right? Like the back to normal is actually not dependent on coronavirus. It's dependent on public policy. And we're not making the public policy decisions right now to be on track for that. You know, I think Cuomo is talking about reopening the government and reopening the state in stages or in phases. But, you know, it's risky. Obviously, all of us incur some kind of risk, but without mass testing, it's even riskier. And basically, a lot of these folks are stuck between a rock and a hard place because Republicans don't want to fund tests. They're fighting against funding testing. We could have funded all of this by now, but Republicans don't want to. They don't, and they have this magical thinking that the reason they don't want to fund testing is because they literally ascribe to this insane magical thinking. It's like that meme where the guy's like tapping his forehead. It's like can't have coronavirus. You can't test positive for coronavirus.
Right.
Oh, God.
Right.
And it's that same thing that he did when this whole thing started. He kept that cruise ship with all of those people offshore because if he allowed the cruise ship to come to the United States with people with coronavirus, then it would have increased the number of confirmed cases in the United States with coronavirus. Doesn't mean those people didn't have it. He just didn't want the statistic that confirmed how bad it was. And that's essentially what we're kind of seeing with mass testing. Like, a lot of them don't want to confirm these tests because, and they don't want to fund tests, because if those tests come up positive, when this first hit New York, like half of the people who got tested positive, almost 40 to 50%. And now what we're seeing is when we do antibody tests, you know, we're talking about maybe 25% of all New Yorkers having had coronavirus, whether you were symptomatic or not.
Yeah, today they released a number, said 2 million.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is that we don't know if that immunity lasts. So there are so many things that we don't know. You know, we're hearing from China and we're hearing from other countries that there may be a possibility that you could get it twice, that this is not like chickenpox where you get it once and you have lifelong immunity. And so we don't know how long that immunity window is. We solve that with tests. And so we need to fund the damn tests, because you get mass testing capacity and then you get contact tracing, and then we can all get back to our lives. But because they don't want to admit how bad this problem is, they don't want to fund the testing.
This type of behavior on the GOP side, on the Republican side, where you're, you know, basically playing semantics and, you know, not wanting, you know, the stats to look bad because it hurts you in the elections, and basically putting party and politics and gamesmanship ahead of human lives.
Yep.
You know, I mean, you're much smarter than me while you're much younger also, but how did we, other than Trump, how did we get here? Because it's tough for me to believe that this is all him.
Oh, yeah, no. Trump is a symptom of a problem, but he is not the core of the problem. He's not the root of the problem. Because let's say, like, you wave a magic wand and Trump is gone tomorrow, we still have the problem of science denial. We still have the problem of money in politics, because, you know, you have to ask the question that you just asked. Why are we at the point where policy is being placed above human life? Mm-hmm. And the reason that is happening is because of the corrupt role of money in politics. Because there is too much money to be made to worry about human life, right? Like, that is why we don't have health care as a guarantee, because there is too much money to be made off of profiteering off of insulin when the patent for it was $1. There's too much money to be made off of insulin profits to make insulin at a price that everyone can afford to continue living their lives, right? There's too much money to be made for the oil industry, too much money to be made for big real estate developers, for Wall Street, for all of these folks. And what gets compromised is public policy that works for working people. You know, like you look at all these people that are salivating to reopen the economy. Like, you look at what Governor Kemp is doing in Georgia, reopening the economy with no reason. They're reopening all the hair salons and everything. Whose lives are being in danger?
Working people, black and brown mostly.
Black people, Latino people, the people who are picking our food, the people who are delivering our groceries, and the people who are living in the economy. Those are the lives that they're sacrificing. Because guess what? Governor Kemp, he did not reopen the governor's mansion for tours again. They are sacrificing our lives to late capitalism. They don't give a damn, which is why we have to fight for public policy that actually protects people. Because, you know, if you live and die by profit, what you're essentially saying is that you're willing to sacrifice the lives of working people. Because the people who are privileged, the people who can work from home, the people who can order in, the people, you know, all of those folks, you know, those of us, it's not to say that you're bad or you're wrong, but it's to say that there's a very huge class difference between who lives and who dies in the age of coronavirus.
Would you say that we have on the other side of this, or even right now, America has a cultural problem with how we deal with these issues that you're talking about? Because part of, when I look at these numbers of cases in the United States versus the rest of the world, the amount of deaths in the United States versus the rest of the world, what I personally see is a lack of discipline, a lack of leadership, and also the class and economic issues that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think it's a cultural problem. I think it's a political problem. But there's a lot of issues that we have. One is that we have a Republican Party that has been taken over by white supremacists and corporate lobbyists. And so they have been completely diverted away from the public good, but then also just our political system overall. I'm not here to say that Democrats have no problems. Democrats have real problems. There are tons of healthcare and big pharma lobbyists that have influence in the Democratic Party as well. So it's a political problem. It's also a cultural problem because that has to do with our history. First of all, I was one of the first people because our community, my congressional district is the most impacted congressional district in the country, which means here in the Bronx and Queens, we started seeing these patterns early before the statistics really started to bear out. And I started ringing the alarm early. Community activists started ringing the alarm early. Black and brown community leaders started ringing the alarm early, saying there is a racialized impact here. Black people are being disproportionately impacted by this. Immigrant communities are being disproportionately impacted. And I started to talk about this before the statistics really started to drop. And people lost their minds. Why do you need to make this about race?
What?
White people are being impacted.
When I tweeted the coronavirus got to America and got racist, people lost their minds on my Twitter page.
People lose their minds the moment we talk about racial realities in America. And we really need to confront that. The reason we cannot confront the racial reality is even the step before that is that people have just straight up meltdowns when you talk about race. And they just don't even want to have the conversation. And that is a huge cultural problem that we have because it prevents us from addressing the actual core issue. We have a huge issue of class, of course. And we also have an issue of science denial, which also has history in race as well, because, I think Black and brown communities have historically been used as medical experiments in the United States. Yep. In Puerto Rico, they used, there were experiments, and what we've seen in Haiti, experiments around syphilis, experiments around birth control. They sterilized Puerto Rican women. All of this is true. None of this is a conspiracy theory. All of this is just on the facts, true, confirmed. And so there is a lot of historical skepticism around, around that kind of care in Black and brown communities. But that is because of the history and the legacy of racist policies. And so all of us, we need to really understand that context and also realize that we have a lot of science education that we need to do as well. But any of these, the problem isn't even the fact that these things happen. The problem is the fact that we can't even talk about it.
That's right.
Because the moment you talk about it, people, it's like...
Well, it flies in the face of their, perfect America, America, the greatest place on earth. Because when you start bringing up the problems and you start bringing up the flaws, now you're questioning greatness.
Well, and also it's like guilt. The second white people are forced to face that they may benefit from racism, that they can't conceive of that as an idea. And it's interesting, Alexandria, you're the perfect person to sort of talk about this because you are such a lightning rod for these people. And obviously I see it because I occupy so many worlds. So when I post things about you or when you came on my IG live show and I promote you, anything like that, I see this visceral reaction. The only thing that's worse than pointing out that racism exists and inequities exist is having it pointed out by a woman of color. I mean,
oh yeah,
the people lose their minds about you.
They absolutely lose it. And you bring up this really this really important point, Rosenberg, in that white and light-skinned people, and I include myself because all of this includes colorism, not just racism. We benefit, and you don't have to be racist to benefit from the structures of racism, right? Like, and it perpetuates everything. Like when people talk about passing, when people talk about this, when people talk about that, it's not intentional. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go outside and benefit from racism today. Like, these aren't conscious choices. But I think the reason people get so upset is because of that guilt. And you know what? Like, we don't want to talk about issues of colorism. We don't want to talk about issues. And this perpetuates. You know, this includes white people, but it's in our Latino communities. It's in Black communities. You know, when they talk about the colorism within that and how people benefit from those structures.
It's in every community where there is different complexion.
Yeah, exactly.
It's everywhere. It's in Jewish communities that, you know, deny some Black people that they are Jewish. It's in Muslim communities where you have colorism and issues with Black Muslims versus lighter skinned Muslims. It's everywhere. It's in Africa. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And the thing we all we just need to get to is that first point where we can talk about it without people losing, like, their core identity. But that's a function of white supremacy, right? In that white supremacy is, people think that structures of white supremacy, and they think it's people running around with hoods on, and they think it's the KKK. That's the most extreme manifestation of white supremacy. But people don't just wake up and wear a hood one day, go from being normal to wearing a hood. And we're seeing this radicalization in real time in our society. A lot of people are seeing people that they once knew, once went to high school with, or what have you, now all of a sudden, like, going full-blown white supremacists. How does that happen? You know, it happens, one part is because you have this intersection of race and class. You know, Lyndon B. Johnson once said, this was the President of the United States, he said that you could get a white man to empty his pockets for you if you can convince him he's better than a Black man. And what white supremacy does is that it creates a system of self-worth that is, there's no script for it, but it is invisible, but it is it's not, I won't say it's invisible, I would say it's silent but very present, right? For example, let's talk about white supremacy and coronavirus. When coronavirus first hit, and we knew very little about it in the context of the United States, it's, we got to take care of everybody. We need to start talking about universal basic income. Like, people started entertaining the most like, all of a sudden everybody was a democratic socialist, right? When we didn't know who this hit and we didn't know who was vulnerable. But the moment that the statistics started bearing out that this was hurting Black people the most.
What? Open it up.
Oh, no, we have rallies now. Yeah. We have rallies of people who don't care. They're risking their lives because they want to go out there and rally and ask for their freedom back.
Exactly. And the moment that these statistics started, now once we started determining and the statistics started showing that the people who were vulnerable are Black, brown, and working class, now what we're seeing is, personal about responsibility, stop smoking, stop drinking alcohol. Now it's your fault, right? Now it's because, and the insinuation is that this is because Black people are irresponsible, brown people are don't understand, aren't taking this seriously. Now it makes it that much easier to reinforce these damaging and untrue stereotypes, and that is white supremacy in action, because it is reinforcing this, like, invisible script of worthiness and intrinsic character, which is ultimately how white supremacy functions in America, right? Like, when you look at how slavery was justified, it was because, they went to Africa, called people savages, called people this, that, approximated Black and brown people to animals, which is what this president does to immigrants now, comparing immigrants to infestations, to vermin. This is like, this is what you do. You intrinsically dehumanize.
That's right.
You intrinsically dehumanize races of people or communities of people, whether they're Jewish, whether they're this, that, or the other, in order to facilitate treating them less than. And that's exactly what we saw here with coronavirus, because it was dramatic. Like the day.
Within days, yep. Within days.
In days. It went from us entertaining some of the most radical, positive public policy changes we will have had in 100 years. We were talking about guaranteeing health care in this country. We were talking about guaranteed universal basic income in this country. The moment the statistics came out about race, we started reopening, and we're like, now we're not going to actually do anything. And that is how it also reinforces classism, because who loses out from that too? Poor and working class white people. Because if you're just a normal working class white person that could have benefited from all of those policies, now this has become about race and you don't want to talk about it, and now you're not going to support these policies that will help you on the basis of the controversies of race, because we do not have the capacity to talk about race. Now we're backing away from
jewelry. That's jewelry right there. Gems from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And you, too, can have an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in your community if you get out and vote like we did around here to have her. It's amazing.
And we're still having that primary June 23rd. There are badass people. Damelis Lopez is running in the South Bronx. That are running in primaries just like me. There are many others happening in the state. So please don't get deflated because the presidential is not happening. We have the capacity to change the world if you just vote in your primary election in June, because there are other people like me that are running this year. So make sure you turn out and vote.
We want to have those people on, and we want to have you back on as we get closer to that date. So, because I know there's absentee voting and polls will be open as well for that time. So you can vote from your crib, just like that.
Absolutely.
AOC, Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
You keep doing that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.